hope that she changes her mind, because it'd be good for the American people, and I think it'd be good for you all if she actually ran a real campaign.
A real campaign? That'd ruin everything. You can't be running a real campaign. What is a real campaign anyway? It's probably a racist characterization. It sounds like the patriarchy offering their judgmentalism again. A real campaign? What do you mean by that? Oh, those wacky Democrats. That was JD Vance, of course, talking about Kamala. You know Kamala. Ba-ba-ba-bum-bum. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-dum. It's Friday already. I can't believe that. How did that happen? Absolute madness. Loose on the planet once again. Kamala answered a couple of questions yesterday on a tarmac. I think it lasted just under 90 seconds. And did they ask her about her favorite ice cream, Jeff? Because usually they like to ask about favorite ice cream. They didn't get to the ice cream, so they really didn't get involved in all that. Did they ask her about her wanting to confiscate guns from people in a mandatory program? Did they ask her about that? They didn't ask her about that, did they? No. Did they ask her about the border? Did they ask her about her great success story on the border? They didn't ask her about that, did they? It's good to be a Democrat. Did they fluff her? Did they give her a tongue bath while she stood there on the tarmac? I think they did, from top to bottom, skipping any parts. I don't know for sure. Quite remarkable. We have a great many absurdities to share, because the Democrats are on the loose, aren't they? Yes, they are. And our remarkable stories sheet today. President Trump held a press conference at Mar-a-Lago yesterday, and it was slightly over an hour long, slightly more than an hour long. And the former president and future President Trump, he answered how many questions? I think it was 42 questions over the course of 63 minutes. He took 42 questions, and he answered them all. Unlike Joe Biden and unlike Kamala Harris, he can stand there and he can take questions without a teleprompter, without prep, without members of his team standing there and flagging everything that happens. He can stand on his own 2 feet, as we used to say in the United States, America, and it's a remarkable thing. So he held this press conference, went on for more than an hour. And we have some of it for you. We can't play the whole thing because it's more than an hour long, but we have portions of it which we will share with you today. And all kinds of great headlines too. You know, Trump's attacks Harris and Walz during first appearance since Democratic ticket was announced. CNN, that's a CNN headline. They don't mention that Kamala hadn't, when they wrote that headline, had a press conference, and she still hasn't had a press conference. And she announced yesterday that she'll be arranging to do an interview sometime before the month ends. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it's the 9th of the month of August, and so that gives her 20-some days before she has to announce that she's going to do an interview. And in the meantime, Soviet-style Black Sea silence, because when you're a Democrat, you're a Democrat all the way, from your first cigarette to your last dying day, and they don't have to answer questions. Don't you know who they are? Don't be ridiculous. How dare you suggest that she has to answer questions, as JD Vance did. But they don't have to, because they're Democrats. The press is running the campaign for her, as they ran the campaign for Joe Biden, as they indulged and engaged in a 3.5-year cover-up of Joe Biden's decline, his precipitous decline. And that was all fine because the news media's got their backs, And I was talking to my friend Hung Kao, Naval Academy, Navy diver, Special Forces, all kinds of amazing careers, Iraq, all of that. And, he's being attacked by the news media, demanding all the specifics of his military record and the dates and the wheres and how many shots were fired. But of course, they don't do that with Tim Walz, with his National Guard, his National Guard career because were it not for double standards, liberals would have no standards at all. Remarkable things going on there. Also, I didn't get to this yesterday, but turns out Democrat governor and vice presidential running mate to Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, signed legislation redefining the term sexual orientation because they had to protect people's sexual orientation by law because of all the discrimination that's taking place in their minds. And he signed, the Democrats put together this legislation, and Tim Walz signed it, and the sexual orientation includes pedophiles. So they've got legal protections for child molesters in Minnesota, thanks to Democrats, because they love molesting children, I think is the short version of that, right? I mean, the party of Jeffrey Epstein, aren't they, and the Bill Clinton's internship program, and Harvey Weinstein gets a standing ovation from the Democrats. They all knew about him. The list goes on and on. But in Minnesota, the governor and vice presidential running mate, Tim Walz, signed the legislation, and Republicans wanted to put in language in Minnesota saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't protect child molesters. And the Democrats raised holy heck, and they pounded the table, and they were furious. And they said, no, the legislation that protects sexual orientation must include what they call MAPs, right? They call them MAPs, minor attracted persons. That's a child molester, a child rapist. And the Democrats, they want to protect child rapists. And, they have it as part of education in schools now, too, with books like Genderqueer, a visual guide to man-on-boy child molestation, which the Democrats support wholeheartedly, full-throatedly, if you will. Amazing stuff. So, yeah, he signed legislation. The running mate did, Tim Walz, redefining the term sexual orientation to include pedophiles because the Democrats want to include and protect pedophiles. That is to say, child molesters. And that's your Democratic Party today. They're not what they used to be, not by a long shot. And also because Kamala chose Tim Walz, who says that socialism, one man's socialism is another man's neighborliness. Neighborliness at the point of a gun. The state will tell you what is neighborly, and you will bow to the state. And you will be neighborly. That means handing over all of your possessions at the point of a gun, because only the state has guns, because Kamala has a mandatory, what'd she call it, Jeff, a mandatory buyback program. Buyback. Now, did I buy the gun from you in the first place? No, I didn't. So you can't buy it back. And if it's mandatory, what it is confiscation. But according to the fact checkers run by Democrat operatives, it's not gun confiscation. It's just mandatory. It's a mandatory government grabbing your gun thing, but it's not confiscation, because they use the words, but they don't know what they mean. And if they're talking, they're lying. They're the left. But the Democrat socialists, Bernie Sanders he honeymooned in the Soviet Union, and when it was the USSR. And Tim Walz, he honeymooned in communist China because he loves communism, I guess. That must be the answer. The Democratic Socialists of America take credit for Kamala Harris picking Tim Walz as her running mate. Democratic Socialists. The Democrat Party and the news media is the most corrupt institution in America. Keep that in mind at all times. They are the opposite of truth tellers. They are truth killers. They murder truth in the cradle. They drown truth in the bassinet. They hold it underwater until it stops struggling. The truth is not their friend. The Democratic Socialists of America take credit for Kamala Harris picking Tim Walz as running mate. Tim Walz says socialism is nothing but neighborliness and the murder of 100 million people, the enslavement of billions of people, the brutalization of millions and millions of people, the Gulag archipelago, creating countries like Cuba, where the voluntary departure of one of their subjects is called an escape. If you have to escape from a country, if the government calls your departure an escape, that should tell you everything you need to know about socialism. And in Venezuela, where they're emptying the prisons and sending all their gang members to the United States to, drag women down sidewalks in New York City and stuff, The Democrat Party is the Socialist Party now, and the Democratic Socialists take credit for Kamala Harris picking Tim Walz, the running mate. He honeymooned in communist China. He lived a year in communist China, sent there naturally by Harvard, where he did not attend college, but has this strange relationship with Harvard anyway, and they sent him to communist China. He visited China about 30 times or more. They can't quite figure out exactly how many times, but he loves communist China. Remarkable stuff. Yeah, and now the socialists are taking credit. Again, when you say socialism is neighborliness, I think you can fairly be described as a socialist. When you honeymoon in communist China, and you know, his wedding day, they chose their wedding day very carefully. He and his wife loves the smell of napalm in the morning. She loved during the riots where Democrats were burning Minneapolis to the ground and other parts of Minnesota too. She left her windows open at night, and she brags about this. She left the windows open at night of their $1 million house in Minnesota so she could smell the city burning. She said this. She loved the smell of the smoke. Reminds me of Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now with I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Smells like victory, right? Remarkable things going on in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party isn't. They're a socialist party. They're no longer a Democratic Party. They're no longer the Democratic Party. And now the socialists taking credit in the United States for Kamala Harris picking Walz. That's kind of a clue. That's what you might call a clue. If you were a producer at 60 Minutes at CBS News or something, you might want to pay attention to that. But they won't. They won't, I can assure you. The Israeli Defense Forces destroyed 60 different Hamas terror targets in the Gaza yesterday. I like to call it the Gaza. I think it's more fun. Not just Gaza. When you say the Gaza, it's more fun. And so in the Gaza, the Israelis dropped bombs on 60 Hamas terror targets because there are terrorists everywhere. They're because of radical Islam. Because of radical Islam. That's one of the things about radical Islam is they do a lot of that. Speaking of which, Taylor Swift, she's a songstress, and a lot of people enjoy her music. And she canceled, as you know, we talked about it yesterday. She canceled a number of shows in Europe because some local young men who converted to Islam and were inspired by ISIS and by Al-Qaeda, they were going to go murder as many people as they could at Taylor Swift concert or concerts. So they canceled all the Taylor Swift concerts because they didn't want Muslims to murder them wholesale. And it turns out one of the lead murderers who was inspired by ISIS and Islam, because it's the religion of peace, you know, and or pieces, depending on whether you're talking about before the explosion or after the explosion. But this guy, he told his people at work that he wouldn't be seeing them again because he had something big going on. And one of the other teenage terrorists was hired to work security at one of the Taylor Swift concerts. Kind of an inside job they were working on there. Isn't that amazing stuff? Yes, it is. So we've got that going between the bombs in the Gaza and the Taylor Swift concert. And let's not leave out Iran sending a Pakistani man to the United States to pull together a plot to assassinate Donald Trump because, it's the religion of peace. Everywhere you look, just more peace is being spread. That and genocide and kidnappings and rapes and murders and torture and on an epic scale worldwide in Europe, in the Middle East, in the United States, out of Pakistan, out of Iran. Pay no attention to any of that. Oh, and video has surfaced of Tim Walz. He was on with his friends on MSDNC, and it was a while back now. And he said that free speech doesn't exist if the government, that's to say the Democrat Party, the left, the commies, the socialists, if the government decides that it's misinformation, then they can trample your free speech. Then they just declare everything they disagree with to be misinformation. Like, Donald Trump and Russian collusion, like Hillary Clinton's dossier, like masks protecting you from COVID, like the vaccines keeping you from getting, misinformation that they spread constantly. But they believe that socialism is neighborliness and free speech is subject to the approval of the government, and they'll tell you what's misinformation and what is not. Amazing stuff. So we've got that. And even Jake Tapper at CNN, a former Democrat Capitol Hill staffer, naturally, talking about the smear of J.D. Vance. And how about Tim Walz's military record? A lot to talk about there. I'm telling you, so much to say. We are at 888-630-9625. We got some Olympic stuff too. A lot of people watching the Olympics this year. I'm not. You got a bit of this and a bit of that. 888-630-9625.
You're listening to The Chris Plant Show.
All right, Jeff. Let's see. Let's take a phone call. When do you hear this? Tim Walz hosting a Muslim cleric that celebrated October 7th and shared pro-Hitler website. I've got that coming up for you too. They love Hitler, don't they? They love talking about Hitler. They love spreading the word. Let's take a phone call, Jeff. Let's go to Philip, formerly of Arlington. Philip, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Good morning, Chris. Thanks for taking my call. I was assigned to the Joint Staff in the Pentagon working on the Afghanistan desk, and an Army colonel assigned to the Iraq desk was asking me questions about threat areas in Afghanistan, which cities and towns. And finally I said, well, sir, why do you want to know this? He said, well, my daughter's a public affairs officer deployed there. And a few weeks later, I came back in the office and everybody's in a very somber mood. I said, what's going on? He said, Colonel Walker's daughter was killed yesterday in Afghanistan. So her name was First Lieutenant Laura Margaret Walker. And I'd like to say to Breonna Keeler and all the other scumbags out there that are belittling the service of public affairs and combat camera, screw you, because you don't know what you're talking about. She gave her life for our country.
And she was, if I have this right, a Naval Academy grad, right? And
West Point. She was the first West Point female officer killed in Afghanistan. You're thinking about the Marine Corps major,
right?
Naval Academy.
You're correct.
So this is a West Point graduate.
And you worked in the Joint Staff in the Pentagon with Colonel Walker, and it was Colonel Walker's daughter that was killed. And this is in relation to the fact that the news media and CNN attacking J.D. Vance, mockingly referring to him as a public affairs officer who actually served in Iraq as a Marine Corps enlisted man, and unlike Governor Walz, who abandoned his unit when they were deploying to Iraq. Right, Philip?
That's exactly right, Chris. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were no clear-cut front lines. You were subject to assault anywhere, whether it was a suicide bomber or a mortar.
And Breonna Keister, I will share that with you today as well. Philip, thank you. God bless you.
This is the Chris Plant Show.
Now, since Philip just called in, and our brilliant colors, our All-American colors, our All-American listeners, serving on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon, and the colonel's daughter killed in combat, West Point grad, another young woman from the Naval Academy, also referenced, who was killed in combat, working as public affairs specialists, where in combat zones you may actually take the CNN reporter and camera crew out into the combat zone, and the reporters will tell you that they're in great danger, but now they're smearing and slandering people with the military occupation, the MOS, the specialty, being a public affairs officer in a combat zone. Thank you very much. Unlike Tim Walz, who left his unit before they deployed to Iraq, they went into the combat zone, and Tim Walz did not. On the other hand, a U.S. Marine who joined when he was 17 years old, not because he was building his political future, but because it's what he chose to do after graduating from high school, J.D. Vance, did go into the combat zone. And now on CNN, their anchor girl, their anchor pony, Breonna Keeler was taking shots at diminishing, slandering, smearing the Republican vice presidential running mate of President Trump for purely and entirely political reasons. Breonna Keeler should be canceled, and CNN should never be viewed again by anyone because they're just a propaganda outlet. Here's let me share with you a little bit because JD Vance has responded already, and there are other people responding out there in the real world. And Breonna Keister, where she sits, this is just another thing to smear for political purposes. The Hill typing, JD Vance hits CNN anchor for, quote, imperfect messenger, end quote, quip on military records. It was a quip. That's what The Hill calls it. It was a smear. It was a slander. It's what the news media does because the news media is not a legitimate news media in the United States. It's a propaganda arm of the Socialist Party, which is the Democrat Party, and I'm going to get into that a little further as we go forward today as well. Since the Democratic Socialists have come out, a socialist party have come out in the United States, and they're taking credit for Kamala Harris picking Tim Walz, meaning they're very proud and happy that the guy who says socialism is equal to neighborliness, nothing could be more absurd. It's like the Manson family is the model American family, and socialism is neighborliness. So Senator J.D. Vance criticized, The Hill writes, CNN's Breonna Keeler, a.k.a. Breonna Keister, on Thursday for saying he was an imperfect messenger, whereas apparently Tim Walz is the perfect messenger for, I guess, socialism and for rioters and for pedophiles, which is how he would be characterized if only there were an R after his name. Now, the story continues that Keeler on CNN's Inside Politics, and that's where they reside, that's for sure. Every show on CNN should be called Inside Politics, discussed the ongoing debate. There's an ongoing debate now about Walz's military record. The Minnesota National Guard came out yesterday and officially on the record said that Walz has illegitimately described himself as a command sergeant major for years. He did not retire at that rank. He's not entitled to claim that rank. He was demoted as he left. He did not complete the requisite work to be a command sergeant major, which is a very big deal, being a command sergeant major in the enlisted ranks. But never mind that. So on CNN's Inside Politics, said that he's an imperfect messenger, whereas Breonna is the perfect messenger for the Democrat Party. Since, honestly, the media is everything to the Democrat Party. Without the media, the Democrat Party ceases to exist, certainly as a legitimate political party in the United States. Now, let's go to what Breonna actually said on CNN because there's discussion of stolen valor. He also, I played the audio yesterday, Tim Walz, said that he carried a rifle into combat, which he never did, and that's a lie, and that's their accusations of stolen valor being directed at the Democrat Party's vice presidential candidate, who does not carry the rank of command sergeant major into his retirement years. Just not true. Look, I mean, he served in the National Guard, and as he said, sometimes full time. But he did not deploy to Iraq. He did not go into a combat zone. He went to Italy. I love Italy. Isn't Italy great? Where he served in a remote capacity, providing support to the operations in Afghanistan, but he never set foot in Afghanistan. Italy is not considered to be hardship duty, And if you like ravioli, and wonderful people, then Italy is not hardship duty. So here's Breonna Keister yesterday on CNN, smearing, slandering, and doing the Democrat Party's work as usual.
At what point did military service become a liability? That's one of the things that's sort of on my mind as I look at this. I also think that J.D. Vance, as a messenger on this, may be an imperfect messenger, because we have, as you introduced him, as a combat correspondent, which was what his title was. But when you dig a little deeper into that, he was a public affairs specialist, someone who did not see combat, which certainly the title combat correspondent kind of gives you a different impression.
You know, combat correspondent sounds like war correspondent, where journalists and CNN reporters go into Iraq and they declare themselves to be war correspondents, and they're generally escorted to the front lines, if they get that far, by public affairs specialists who are combat correspondents in this case. And the question, of course, was about Governor Walz. But you see how they've turned it around at the people at CNN. Isn't that amazing? They just spin that around because that's what they do. They're a front group for the Democrat Party, and she's a sock puppet for the Democrat Party, Breonna Keister. And if she wants to go around picking fights, she should probably know a little more about the people with whom she's picking a fight. Vance fires back at, quote, disgusting CNN anchor, suggesting his military service was embellished amid Walz dispute. Now, he never embellished J.D. Vance, his military career, his time in the Marine Corps, and Walz has. And that is what the discussion is if you're a rational person and not a lion Sacagawea. And I've got to say the Lion Sacagawea Award of the day goes to Breonna Keister at CNN. So the GOP hopeful has repeatedly attacked the Minnesota governor over the growing military controversy. But at CNN, that's an attack on J.D. Vance. It turns into an attack on J.D. Vance. Senator J.D. Vance, Ohio Republican, fired back at CNN after an anchor suggested he embellished his own military service as the Republican vice presidential nominee hammered. I gotta tell you, the Democrat Party and the media, but we know who they are. Just amazing stuff that we're dealing with here, because the media is the most corrupt institution in America, and the love affair, the sexual love affair they have with the Democrat Party is beyond appalling. It honestly is. And now J.D. Vance has to be, now he's on the defensive, not Walz, right? Because the crooked news media is doing their job, and that is attacking the Republican and giving the Democrat a free pass. There is no controversy about J.D. Vance's service in the Marine Corps, his deployment to Iraq, but they're weasels that they are, trying to wheedle their way into any daylight, any crack between this and that. And how dare a journalist indict a Marine Corps enlisted man who is bringing reporters into the war zone. And the reporters, again, will lay claim to having been in the war zone, and she seems to be suggesting that he, J.D. Vance, is not in the war zone. Again, he joined when he was 17 years old. I believe that's correct. 17 years old. And now the headlines are Vance knocks CNN's Keeler over military record criticism. Well, why is she criticizing his military record? Is there any controversy about his military record? Vance fires back at disgusting CNN anchor, suggesting his military service is not what he said. And it is amazing. Newsweek magazine, J.D. Vance's military records come under scrutiny. What? After Tim Walz attack. Well, it's not an attack. It's pointing out the reality. And again, yesterday I shared with you the Minnesota National Guard making it clear on the record and in public that J.D. Vance is not embellishing his record, but that Tim Walz has embellished his record, first of all, with the claim that he's retired as a command sergeant major, which he did not. He also, I played the audio yesterday for you, where he talked about carrying his rifle into combat while he's talking about banning rifles, right? And you know, this they are socialists, and I've been saying this for years. They're not liberals. They're the left. They're not liberals. They are the left. Now, where's Breonna Keister, Lion Sacagawea Award, when it comes to this story, for example? And there are many like them. This one in the Washington Examiner by Gabe Kaminsky. Tim Walz, Kamala's running mate, repeatedly hosted Muslim cleric who celebrated October 7th and shared pro-Hitler website link. But that's okay because Democrats hate the Jews. You know, the Catholics hate the Protestants and the Protestants hate the Catholics, and everybody hates the Jews, at least in the Democrat Party. And that's why they couldn't pick the Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, because they knew that too many Democrat voters would oppose him for being Jewish. Sieg Heil, meine Schatzi, Deutschland, Deutschland, Democrat Party. Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, on at least 5 occasions as governor of Minnesota, hosted a Muslim cleric who celebrated Hamas's October 7th attack last year on Israel and promoted a film popular among neo-Nazis that glorifies Adolf Hitler and his Socialist Workers' Party. The Washington Examiner found the Imam Assad Zaman, of the Muslim American Society of Minnesota, and there are a lot of radical Islamists in Minnesota. They elect radical Islamists to Congress, the Democrats do, who hate the Jews more than just about anybody. Remarkable stuff. Joined other Muslim leaders in May of 2023 for a meeting about mosque security with Walz's gubernatorial office in Minnesota. Zaman, who also spoke at a May 2020 event to call for peaceful protest with the governor during the riots in Minnesota. And while the Democrat governor, was not calling out the National Guard, even though Democrat mayors were pleading with him to do so day after day. Finally, after 3 days, the Minnesota National Guard was called out. But in the meantime, his wife was at home with the windows open, she bragged, enjoying the smell of the burning city because she loved the smell of napalm in the morning. She's pretty amazing stuff. Colonel Kilgore as the First Lady of Minnesota. So he also spoke at a May 2020 event, and George Floyd, St. George Floyd, who had died of heart failure while resisting arrest yet again. In April of 2019, the cleric delivered an invocation before Walz's state address, just months after Zaman called for an end to a government shutdown at a press conference with Walz in January of 2019. Zaman, moreover, attended a 2019 event that Walz hosted for Ramadan social media post show. Walz's ties to Zaman could serve as a problematic baggage for the Minnesota governor, but not with the news media. They'll smooth it over. They're pro-jihad. They hate the Jews. Even their Jews hate the Jews. It's kind of an amazing thing to see. So could serve as problematic baggage for the Minnesota governor's campaign with Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee. News of the ties also comes after the Washington Free Beacon report this week found that Walz spoke at a 2019 event with an anti-Semitic scholar who has defended terrorism against Israel. But when you're a Democrat, they just hate the Jews, and they got a lot of Muslim voters in Minnesota. So you got to kowtow to the genocide branch of the anti-Semitic genocide branch of the Democrat Party, right? Zaman, who is from Bangladesh. I like to say Bangladesh. Don't you prefer Bangladesh? I like Bangladesh. It sounds more like bongo drums. Said that on October 7th of last year, that he stands in solidarity with Palestinians against Israeli attacks. Now, they had just massacred 1,200 Israelis, stolen people as hostages, raped, murdered, tortured to death. And here's what Tim Walz's buddy said, that he stands on that day, stands in solidarity with Palestinians against Israeli attacks. Israeli attacks. Now, again, 60 bombs dropped on terrorists in Gaza yesterday. Those are Israeli attacks because the savages, the genocidal savages, are still attacking Israel. That day, which saw 1,200 Israelis murdered by Hamas terrorists, he also shared an image of a Palestinian flag on Facebook. He's from Bangladesh, mind you. In response to a post by Youssef Abdullah, director of the Islamic Association of North America, declaring Palestine has the right to defend itself. Yeah, that wasn't defending itself. Unless all-out war is self-defense, genocidal war is self-defense. So we've got that. And then, hey, how about this Hitler movie? Maybe you'd like this Adolf Hitler movie because, these are friends of the Democrat Party, friends of Tim Walz. And Breonna Keister doesn't have anything to say about any of this because death to the Jews.
We can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
There's only one Chris Plant. The Chris Plant Show.
At what point did military service become a liability?
Breonna Keister, military service is not a liability. Lying politicians, that's supposed to be a liability when you're a politician and you're asking to become a heartbeat away from the presidency of the United States. And you lie about Command Sergeant Major. You lie about going and played the audio again for you a few minutes ago, JD. Walz, saying, hey, I carried my rifle into combat, which he didn't do. Let's grab William calling from Silver Spring, Maryland. William, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Listen, I wish people listen to this. It doesn't matter if J.D. Vance was pouring gravy on potatoes in the chow line. The fact is he went to U.S. Marine Corps boot camp. That says it all.
And he went to Iraq.
Yes, but no one brings that up. So Marine boot camp is like nothing else in the military. That says it all. Like, again, even if it was serving gravy and potatoes, he's still a U.S. Marine. Period.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Did you serve in the Marine Corps yourself?
No, I was Navy, but it was almost as bad. Okay, have a good one.
Thank you, William. Yeah, that's right. You go Marine Corps, you go Parris Island, and then you go to Iraq. And he's a Marine. There are rifles and weapons everywhere and bad guys around you everywhere, and the front line is not a clearly defined front line, as Philip said. And, the front line for Tim Walz was in Minnesota, and the front line was overrun by Black Lives Matter.